Hi there, my name's Alex Heslop and I'm the brand ambassador for Jacobs Creek. So as the brand ambassador for Jacobs Creek, it is my role to travel around the different regions in which our portfolio is located and work with staff and consumers to provide education sessions and really increase the knowledge of our brands and our wines throughout the region. Look, I think competition is healthy. The wine industry is really growing in Sri Lanka at the moment. I think that's healthy for all brands. Where Jacobs Creek really stands out and where I think the real kind of mantra and positive values that Jacobs Creek holds is the fruit-forward nature in which we make our wines. Our wines have these beautiful varying varietals, so from Chardonnay to Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc, Shiraz, Cabernet, Sparkling Chardonnay, Pinot Noirs and Rosé. I think the diversity of that portfolio is really amazing and what stands us out from a lot of competition. But also, like I said, the fruit-forward and approachability of those wines and how they can really work to anyone's palate. That versatility and range means that everyone can find a wine within that range, in my opinion, that suits them. So rosé wine can actually be made using quite a varying number of different grapes. Previously at Jacobs Creek and continuing, so at Jacobs Creek we make our rosés in a couple of different methods. And that really comes down to the type of grape that we're using. So the best place to store wine in your home is really down to a consistent temperature. A wine is best stored in a place where we can find minimal light, so minimal sunlight, minimal light from fluorescent lights, anything like that, but also a consistent temperature. So the number one place to not store your wine is your kitchen. Naturally, if you think when you go into the kitchen in the morning, you turn the burner on, you make some fried eggs, something like that, it raises the temperature. If you then head to work, that temperature drops, only for you to return at night and turn the burners back on to make a delicious dinner. So that means our temperature is fluctuating quite a lot. In terms of the perfect place, I would say an area that is consistent in temperature, but also doesn't see too much sunlight, and that's the real key here. Certainly, I think that's one of the most lovely things about the wine industry is how it can lead people on an adventure. I think the way that we consume wine with friends around a table with great food is one of the most enjoyable parts. But not only can that happen, but we can also teach each other about wines. Naturally, as we learn more and more about wine and taste more wines, we start to establish our preferred style or a varietal preference. I think that's really, really exciting, but wine has also grown around the whole world. It's seen in Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere, Europe, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Northern America, and I think that wine really can lead to a beautiful sense of travel and really drive people to see parts of the world that they may not otherwise see. So yeah, wine is all about adventure in my opinion. For a date night, for me it really depends on the time of year to a certain extent. So if you're looking for a nice summer evening, I think something like a really lovely sparkling rosé. It's great, it creates a bit of an occasion. I think that the lovely thing about wine is that it enables people to really sit down and have a convivial moment. So really get to know each other and understand each other. So whether that's on a nice summer evening, having a cool glass of sparkling, some sparkling rosé, or to a colder time in winter where you can sit down over a nice big red like a Cabernet or Shiraz and really get to know each other on a one-to-one level. I think that's a perfect thing about a wine for a date night. Great question, my favourite Jacobs Creek wine. For me, I would have to say it's probably the Jacobs Creek Reserve Coonawarra Cabernet Sauvignon. The Coonawarra itself is a very interesting part of Australia in that the grapes and the vines are grown on what's known as the Terra Rossa soil. So it's a soil with quite high iron content and has this beautiful red colour. That gives to our grapes a beautiful richness and a real power in terms of the flavour that comes out in that Cabernet. From those really dark berry notes that come through into that slight kind of a black pepper as well. For me, this is a classic example of an Australian Cabernet, and for me, probably the number one wine in terms of what I like drinking on my weekends. That's a really good question. It's something that's often not known about too much kind of outside of the wine industry itself. So the difference between sparkling and champagne is that champagne actually comes from the region of Champagne in France. And that actually has a kind of an origin classification to it. So what really stands out here is that champagne has to use 3 different types of grapes. So Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. And they are the only grapes that can be used in the making of champagne wines. In terms of a sparkling wine, that can be slightly different. So in the case of Jacob's Creek, our sparkling Chardonnay Pinot Noir just uses the 2 grapes. For champagne, it's always used in what's known as the method traditionnel. So whereby the wine is made in a tank and then transferred into bottles for aging. It comes into quite a lot of lees contact in there, so it sees a lot of contact with the actual yeast. And then once that goes through the process of resting and then riddling, whereby that yeast is then removed and goes through another process called dosage, where we actually top the wine up before it's corked. That's the real kind of intricacy of champagne. So it's a very hands-on process. I think actually takes quite a lot of time. In terms of sparkling in what's known as often the more kind of New World style, we often see what's known as the transfer method. And this is the real key. So what that does is it enables us to get similar styles of champagne in terms of those beautiful bready and nutty notes coming through that contact with the yeast itself. But also in terms of a Jacob's Creek Chardonnay, sparkling Chardonnay Pinot Noir, it allows us to have this beautiful fruit forward, those really lovely citrusy notes, but also combined with those bready and yeasty flavours. The best way to preserve a wine would be to pump that wine. So get the oxygen out of that bottle, whereby the wine can remain fresh. In cases where wine comes into contact with oxygen, it can often become what's known as over-oxidization, and it can become quite vinegary. So then the best way to preserve it is to use some of the wine pumps you can probably find at your local alcohol store. So in terms of the best way to taste wine, for me, it's depending on your wine. If it's a white wine, it can be poured straight away. But for a red wine, you should allow it to open up slightly. So give it, say, 20 minutes or so, if you can decant the wine, to allow it to really open up and allow the oxygen to come in contact and release a lot of those big, deep flavours. In terms of tasting itself, it really happens in a 3-step process. Firstly, we have a look at the wine itself. So what the wine shows in terms of colour, its depth, and to actually see if there's any sediment in the bottom of the glass. Our second step is to first nose the wine. We have a smell of the wine and see what flavours we can start to pick out. This is a really important process as it gives us an initial understanding of the wine we're drinking and in particular the style of that wine. Our second step is obviously to allow the wine to come into more oxygen contact and really open the wine up. So in this case, we often swill the glass. We then have a smell again. And hopefully that oxygen contact has really allowed those flavours to come out and really express themselves. And finally, we obviously taste. From here, we can start to understand the textures of the wine itself. We may see a high, medium or low body of the wine, a long or short finish, some tannic properties to a lot of red wines, but also really a finish is key here. We want a long finish in our wine that really carries that flavour on through the palate. When we discuss body of wine, it refers to often how the wine feels in the mouth itself, so the weight. So in this case, we see a lot of white wines and sparkling wines tend to have a very, very light and fresh body. As we move through our wines, as we get further into wines with the likes of Chardonnay, we can start to feel that they have more weight in the mouth itself. A really great way of looking at body is a bit like assessing milk. If we have a zero-fat milk, it tends to be very, very light on our palate. As we move through into kind of skim and then into full cream milk, we can start to feel that gets quite a lot heavier. Then obviously you then have cream itself, which is full-bodied, incredibly kind of like texturous and quite heavy. And that's a great way of looking at wine as well. So we can have some really, really light wines like Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, into medium bodies, maybe some Chardonnays, some Pinot Noir, right into some really, really heavy, powerful Cabernets at the full body stage. Definitely not. I think wine is so diverse that we can't really put one wine to a person. As people go through their wine experience, they really do, their palate changes and they really do learn to appreciate new wines and new styles from around the whole world. So I think that's really, again, coming back to that adventure and how people learn to love and understand wine is a real key here. So no, there isn't one wine for one person. As you say, there are a lot of perks to my job, and it's a job that I absolutely love. It gets me out of bed every single morning with a smile on my face. Probably the key principle of that is the people I meet. During my travels and my work throughout many, many cities, I meet people from both the hospitality world, the wine world, and I think that all these people I meet have a real passion for what they do. And at the end of the day, their job brings a smile to someone else's face. And anyone who has that characteristic in what they do is really a friend of mine anywhere I go. So one great thing about wine bottles, when you're looking through a retail store, is they can actually be decoded very, very simply, and that's through the label itself. In this case, we're always looking for the producer. So here we're looking at a Jacob's Creek. The great thing about a wine bottle is that you can always decode it through simply looking at the label. Firstly, you're looking for the maker of the wine itself. So in this case, a Jacob's Creek. And we then look for the varietal in that bottle as well. Here, some Merlot. And then the vintage. So in this case, it's a vintage from 2016. Finally, we're looking for the area that the wine actually originates from. So in this case, the southeastern Australia. If we then turn to the rear of the bottle, we can start to understand more about the flavours of the wine. Quite often you will receive a small blurb about the history of the company, but then some really, really helpful facts in terms of flavours and textures of that wine, often accompanied by a really great food pairing. So if you're ever concerned about a wine or you're unsure, the label's your friend. Hi there, my name is Alex Hessler, and from me and all the team at Jacob's Creek, cheers.